However, we have we are in the process of making fixes, so we've basically encumbered another $2.5 million of those. And so while it's not spent, they've sort of set it aside for anticipated expenses. So the setting up the funds is working out as we planned. And if we get to a point on either fund that we think that we're going to need to use more than we've actually originally set aside, we'll come to the Assembly with as much notice as we possibly can. We are also, as it relates to the earthquake, the administration is also in the process for these expenses. We have basically, I think it's 8 different sort of approaches to reimbursement. For example, we're going to seek separate reimbursements for solid waste services, for AWWU, for MLMP, and I think we had some labor in there. I think the roads, those will be all done separately. So we will be recovering, and as we recover, we'll basically replenish the money that we set aside. So.
I have a question, unless my colleagues do. So what about the opposite? What if we don't end up spending that $30 million? Is that projected? Do you think we're going to spend it all? And if we don't, what happens to it?
So we set aside the fund. We basically reserved part of our cash pool. We just would not spend it.
Okay.
That's what we're doing.
Okay. And then I just want to put in the record that we've been joined by Ms. Kennedy. And go ahead, Mr.
I didn't announce myself either, so.
I said that you were in the room, but we've also been joined by Ms. Quinn Davidson. All right, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think the next item is Mr. Slifka, so I'll let him talk about 3C.
Thank you. Through the chair, so we have closed 2018, and just from an accounting perspective, while there are 12 months in the year, there are 4 additional months that we go through in the accounting process and close and calculate the CAFR. We are in month 13. We are on track for June 30th delivery of the CAFR, and everything seems to be coming along.
Thank you so much. All right. Any questions for Mr. Slifka? All right. Mr. Wilbur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So on 2019, in addition to the first quarter budget revisions that it seems the Assembly, we have a work session tomorrow to look at the Assembly's proposed amendments at 1 o'clock tomorrow. The administration will be meeting probably Monday to review those to see how we might be able to address some or any of those. So we look forward to participating in that tomorrow. We also have a list of the questions from your work session on Friday. You will have those. Desiree will probably have them by 2 o'clock today. I was waiting on a couple. I'm waiting on a response from legal. But what I think I will do is I will send you the response to the 12 of the 13 we have, and then when I get the 13th one, I will send it to you as soon as we're done with this meeting. As it relates to 2019 as a whole, as of March, at the end of March, we're 25% through the year. Our labor spent was at 24%, so all the departments are doing very well. And on the non-labor, it's at about 16% spent, but they've also encumbered or know that they've already set aside another 14%. So on the non-labor side, this is typically what we do every year. We're setting aside those funds in anticipation of spending. So the departments are doing a great job. Really, they're right on track as they've been in the past. If you were to take a snapshot at it, you'll see some departments that are, they look like they've spent almost all of their budget. One of them being the Assembly. They have a significant amount of money in the elections, and so their labor budget is right on track, but their non-labor is basically all consumed. But that will then feather out. But everyone else is looking pretty good. I'm not concerned about pressing on overtime or special projects that I'm not aware of, at least at this time. So that's all I have to report on.
So I have 2 questions. Mr. Peterson, then Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And mine wasn't a question. It was just that the amount that we spent on this year's election was actually less than we spent on the vote by mail election last year. And so we were hoping that we would we would be able to do that, and we did. So I just wanted to let everyone know that, you know, it's actually less expensive than the regular poll-based elections a few years ago. So.
Congratulations to you and to the clerk. Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Lance, I was just going to ask about the fire department and their shift in trying to reduce overtime and how successful that's been.
So as a matter of fact, I'm going to be meeting with the chief today at 2 o'clock to talk about that. But so far, it looks like it is having an effect on reducing their amount of overtime because they haven't. I think the answer is it looks good right now. And I think I mentioned this at the work session. One of the things that we did when we billed the first quarter is we adjusted where the revenue is coming from area-wide to fire service areas. Since we're putting more resources into the EMS side of the business, we basically, when we set the assessments for the fire service area and the area-wide, we adjusted it so more of the cost is going to area-wide and less the fire service to represent. It's a net zero in the total dollars to the fire department. It's just the allocation that was paid.
So I was curious about that. I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, I'll add you to the queue. Ms. LaFrance, then Mr. Whittleton.
Okay, it's fine, Mr. Chair, if Mr. Whittleton wants to follow up for continuity and go after him.
Yeah, so I missed that going through it. So what's the balance? I mean, judges percents.
So it was about $3.5 million. It was about a $3 million shift from
What
fire.
is the percent? I mean, it used to be EMT was X percent, fire was X percent.
Mr. Weldon, I'll have to get you the percentage of that. I think that's simple. Yeah, I'll be guessing. I want to guess 70-30, but I don't think it's 70-30.
For call-out numbers?
No, the percentage of their budget that comes from area-wide as opposed to fire service area.
Great, thank you, Mr. Whittleton. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Wilbur, I have a question about fund balance, and I apologize because I didn't stay for the extended portion of last Friday's meeting, and I may have missed it, and usually the questions come to me afterwards anyway.
Okay.
But the 2019 budget, when it was built, assumed zero 2018 fund balance, correct?
No,
No?
not correct. We assumed when Alex's team was closing the books for 2018, they have a unaudited fund balance of about a positive $600,000. When we put the 2019 first quarter revisions before you, we assumed the use of that $600,000 when we presented a balanced budget to you.
Okay, so when the budget, when we approved it in November, that included an assumption of $600,000 fund balance of 2018?
It did not.
It did not.
It did not. We did not know when we built 19 and approved it in November. We did not assume, did not even know what that fund balance would be. It wasn't until he was able to get the 2018 closed to a point to find out if we would have any fund balance. And it was, in early March or mid-March, we were able to find that out. And we found out that we had $600,000. Then we included that into our proposal for 2019.
Okay, so that was in March, May. And so where my question is coming from is, and I know we had an email exchange about this, and I think I misunderstood a little bit Friday. I thought that there would be some fund balance, that it was recognized that the Assembly had priorities, and we were waiting to get a final fund balance number. However, when we got the adjustments, all the fund balance had already been distributed. And so I'm curious as to, I'm guessing there must be a queued up list of project priorities that are waiting to be triggered.
Right.
And is there a more collaborative way we could do this so that before all these allocations are made, we could have a discussion about some of our priorities on the Assembly side and
Sure.
departmental priorities as well? Unless that's what Friday inadvertently becomes.
Okay. I think, I leave that up to the administration, but I mean, a lot of the stuff that we added on there were things that were already priorities in 19 that we added on to, abatement, homelessness.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Bress, I think, wants to speak on that.
Through the chair to Ms. LaFrance, there are always opportunities for you to come and tell us what your priorities are, but Friday is what that is established for. The recommendation that comes from us with the first quarter budget revisions is the same as our original budget proposal, in that it is our recommendation as to how this money should be spent. So the Assembly can realign those things based on the amendment process. We traditionally have extended invitations to Assembly members to come in and talk to us about what their amendments are, what they're interested in seeing, so that we can consider them in advance of the work session on Friday is great, but after the work session on Friday works for us too, because we will be pulling all of these pieces together at the last minute to consider what these things are and where the impacts are. So yeah, we're absolutely open for you to come in and tell us that, like, Felix has already done it. I think we talked to Assemblymember Constant about it, so.
Okay, thanks.
So everyone else, feel free to jump on the bandwagon. We've got $600,000 to spend. All right. Anything else, Mr. Wolf?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. So moving on in our agenda, Mr. Clouda, what's going on with the Budget Advisory Commission?
So I think I can just stand here and present. So for the record, Nolan Clouda, Chair of the Budget Advisory Commission. So some recent actions that we've taken. We just had a work session last week with the revised Q1 budget that Lance provided to us. We got it actually right before this body got that same presentation. What we were mostly interested in that, most of the changes are relatively mundane and benign, but we did have a lot of concern, of course, about some of the implications of the state budget, and there were some of the same questions that you guys asked last Friday, especially concerning the school debt reimbursement and the implications for our tax bill on individual homeowners. Also, we had some discussion about the Medicaid reimbursement issue with the state and providing notice, and so that was something that we were pretty concerned about as well. So those were a few of the things that we talked about. We've been trying to do more work sessions. For those of you that are new to the Assembly, our commission meets monthly, and we're a group that's composed of a lot of newer faces. A lot of us have a background. Several of us have background in economics or economic development. We've also got some private sector folks and nonprofit and government folks. So a good cross section of people that like to get into the details on policy and budget issues. So, we did a work session also on property tax exemptions and looking at that subject. One of the takeaways from our strategic planning in January was what we could do about property tax exemptions and looking into them. And we had the presentation from the appraisal division and then a follow-up session that we discussed in more detail where they shared their plan to catch up on reviewing all property tax exemptions in 1 year or in over a 3-year period if that's more practical. And so we found a lot of support on our commission for that approach, and I don't know if the Assembly has seen that same presentation or that same document, but to double check those, that at the current rate it would take 16 years to check all property exemptions, and so it's not something that's really able to happen. And so a more equitable distribution of property taxes could be a result. And there was some question about whether back payments could be revenue above the cap, I think, as well, that we weren't quite sure about. So that was something of interest to us as well. Otherwise, some of our priorities for the coming year are of course the 2020 budget preparation. The exempt property tax issue is something that we don't want to dwell on that issue, but we've decided that if it's something that we can tackle, then we should. The spending cap was another issue of ours that we wanted to assess and talk about in more detail. Stormwater utility as well, and proceeds from ML&P. One other comment that I would make to this group, and since a lot of you are new, and I don't know if you guys have chosen a chair yet for the Assembly. I don't know if that's you. So you are the chair then now. Excellent, congratulations. We'd love it when we get when we do have participation from the chair of the Assembly in our meetings, and I know that's something that we've really benefited a lot from in the past, and so we'd love it if you were able to attend regularly. It would be hugely appreciated.
Absolutely, yeah. I plan on attending in the future. I think I have a question from Mr. Weddleton and then Mr. Dyson.
Oh, no, I have two now. Okay. Well, one is we looking for the reimbursement for the ASD capital expenses. We have a couple of things. We said, okay, well maybe if they don't reimburse any, then we owe $20 million for this year. And we could just add that now, be ready to pay it, or we're not sure, so we wait, and then next year do 40 to 60. It would be a catch-up. Did you understand that?
Right, the issue of whether to kind of rip the Band-Aid off all at
Right,
once.
so did you guys take a choice?
So yes, and through the chair, Mr. Weddleton, we talked about that same issue. We wrestled with that a bit too, and what are the implications of a bigger tax hit later versus one now? But also, I wouldn't. I think a comment that I made. I wouldn't want to discount the effect of taking pressure off the state legislature to. If we count on not getting it, are we taking a bit of pressure off the legislature to fight for it? I think with us being the largest municipality in the state doing that, that might be an issue. Others might have a different read of the kind of political tea leaves, but that was one concern we had. But otherwise, I think that it's something that we're wrestling with without having a great answer. Is what I can tell you.
And then can I follow up? So in your discussions on the exemptions, that seems like it's always the topic of that committee over the mid-year. But looking at, should these groups be exempt? You're not looking at that. You're looking at individual, do they still qualify for that exemption in the audit? Is that right?
Right, through the chair, that is what we're looking at. Not as much the policy. At least our last discussion wasn't around the policy of what exemptions are available, but the actual auditing of them and whether they're properly used. And I know that it's something that has been dwelt upon in the past, and so we approach it with that in mind. But it's something like we can either address it and look into it and add some value to it, or we can cross it off and move on to the other things that are our priorities. So
I don't know that aspect is looked at as much, at least that I was aware of. Should we not have exemptions for churches? It seems like that comes up all the time, and that's kind of a moot point in the state. So I'm glad you're doing the part you're doing. Good, very good.
And through the chair, we certainly appreciate that. We think it's a labor-intensive thing. Is what it looks like. It's either there's more bodies that have to be put on it that are either hires or contractors. So that's probably what it comes down to.
Thank you, Mr. Middleton. Mr. Dyson.
I'm always interested when you talk about exempt properties. And were you thinking about nonprofit organizations or something like Providence Hospital or Alaska Native Hospital?
So the categories that we were talking about were the personal, senior, and nonprofit. Is there another one I'm trying to recall?
Disabled veteran.
Sorry?
Disabled veteran.
Disabled veteran, right, thank you. So yes, we were talking about all of those.
But not talking about the hospital.
Well, to the extent that they're getting nonprofit property
are.
tax exemptions, then yes.
Except for
Yes.
regional.
Right. We've understood from the appraisers division that the senior exemptions are a huge category. They're just so numerous that's one that's probably got some that needs to be looked into more carefully. So that was where they said was probably the meat of the issue. But yes, all of the above.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson. Mr. Slivka.
So this goes back to Mr. Chadwick of Internal Audit did a review of this and came to the conclusion the administration has heard and accepts that this is a valid thing to do. We are in the process of staffing up to look at all 90,000 exemptions. We are going to set a 3-year timeline and hope we can get done in 2. We're going to add 3 to 4 staff to roll through these. And the reason for that additional expense is the experience we had last year was we found an additional $1 million worth of revenue that otherwise we would have not collected. We believe if we go through all of this, we're going to get roughly $5 million in additional revenue, the same ratio of people getting exemptions when they no longer qualify for them. And the primary source is residential exemption, where they no longer, it's their primary residence, they live in out of state.
I think I have some questions for you, Mr. Slivka. Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we found $1 million of revenue, or we'll find $5 million of revenue, but we're capped out, right? So his question is a really important one. Is it additional revenue that is then just redistributed, and so everybody's taxes are a little bit lower, or is it additional revenue outside the cap, at least part of which to pay for these additional staffers?
So, through the chair, it depends on the year it's being recaptured. If it's just current year, then I'm not exactly sure how it gets treated. In prior years, I believe it comes in above the cap. What happens is, in the subsequent years, it lowers everybody else's tax.
Right, but at least a portion of it is outside the cap so that we can pay for the additional staffers without having to otherwise alter the budget.
I believe that is the case, but I'm not certain.
Okay.
And through the chair, that was a really important point in our discussion too. Was that I think we of course we see the value in a more equitable, fair distribution of the property tax burden, but getting revenue above the cap is of more interest if we have to add more bodies in order to achieve that. So,
Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. That's a really good question. Did you say 90,000?
Yes.
Out of how many? How many
So
don't have?
we have, I think, close to 100,000 actual properties, and when you count senior exemptions, residential exemptions, veteran exemptions, and you go the other one, it's a lot.
And how many homes are not exempt? Like, what's the ratio?
I would have to look it up. I believe almost everybody gets a residential exemption.
Oh, you're talking about, oh, I see. You're including that in
Yeah.
here. Okay, never mind. Thank you. That makes more sense.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn Davidson. Anything more?
No, I'm always interested in whatever tasks you guys want to assign to us as well too, and items to have us look at. But otherwise, I appreciate the time today.
I think Mr. Weddleton has a list.
Well, just one, so I'd like to see the math on how some of that might be over the cap. Either you guys can study it or Alex or something, but my assumption is you just redistribute it and there's no more money. So, but
Well,
maybe we're wrong.
through the chair, so if we're collecting back taxes from 16 and 17, where those years are done, right? So when you got a residential exemption and you no longer qualify, we're going to go as far back as we can and get those back exemptions. And so if it's 6 years that are closed and gone, we can't really do anything about that.
So
that was
back
really-
taxes could be
One time,
Did you have anything?
I was just going to say through the chair, it's a double benefit, right? So we get to collect back taxes from people who've been erroneously given the exemption, but moving forward, it levels the playing field for all residents and other exemption and property taxpayers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'll see you at the next commission meeting. All right. Moving on to Ms. Marshall. What's going on with this appeal?
Right. So, Sue Marshall, Chief Information Technology Officer. So I'm running the IT department, just for the new members, to let you know. I've been giving kind of really brief updates lately, and this isn't going to be really long, but I thought I would go into a little backstory to help the new members kind of understand where we are. So, excuse me. When I was hired in May of last year, I was tasked with improving SAP performance and getting costs under control for SAP. So when I started, this was kind of the structure of the organization, the green, or the staff that we had, and we had 23 full-time consultants on staff. And this was the structure. I just want to kind of give you a visual. And then as so our current state has changed. So there is still an executive steering committee that we report to, myself and the ETC manager, who guides the overall decision making on how the SAP money is being spent and how we're solving SAP issues as they come up. We have hired a whole bunch. We've hired our staff. This was our staffing plan, and we are meeting it. We are down to 13 active consultants, so we're reducing those costs. This is just a visual of where we're going, or where we're at in the current state. Staffing overview. The goals were to reduce dependence on consultants, and then build an MOA team with less dependency on consultants moving forward. And then the path to do that is a focus on knowledge transfer from the consultants to the staff. And then staff is cheaper than having a consultant. Rate much cheaper, but it also makes sure that we have more brain power in our municipality. This is kind of a financial overview for you. So 17, our spend was about $26 million on SAP. 18, we went down to $10 million, and now our plan is we're going to be at 8.9. So we are definitely on the path to spending less and increasing performance and stabilizing the product.
Mr. Dyson, before that, I don't see Mr. Trainee in the room. Otherwise, he would remind us of the total dollar figure and that this was all a problem of the Sullivan administration. But go ahead, Mr. Dyson.
It goes to Dick Trainee sits in the room.
Did you have a question?
I do. I sometimes think before I talk. I know, amazing concept. So I appreciate your wanting to get information transferred to your employees and preserve. So, and raises the question, what's turnover been like for your staff? 2 years back and since you've been here.
We've been able to retain the staff that have been involved in the SAP project. They've been there. Some of them have been there 5 years, 2 years. It's a great retention right now.
Yeah, and outside of this SAP project?
In my IT department?
Yeah.
We have experience, and I don't know what turnover was before. We've had, I don't know what our turnover rate is. Maybe 5%.
Which is good. So this is such a vital component, and we put all our eggs in one basket almost. We can't do much without it. So we need to get you the tools you need to have, i.e. benefits packages and cheerful place to work, to be proactive at limiting a turnover. And that's not us being benevolent and nice, that's looking after our special interest, which is profound. So please, from my perspective, I think my colleagues, keep us posted and maybe get some smart guys like Falsey and kind of look out ahead and see what might be coming up.
Great.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson. Ms. France.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Marshall. And just on these numbers, when we talk about the 80-odd million or so to build SAP, these figures are just on the expense side, correct?
Yes.
And so they're not part of that 80-odd million. In the top line, capital expenses, I mean, at this point, and I can't remember what's in plan for this year or next, I mean, I'm guessing that probably have to start doing some capital upgrades.
Right,
to keep
to
up.
make sure that we keep current, yeah. So we're looking at, I think we are 2 years out, but okay, I'll keep everyone posted. Thanks. Yep.
Thank you, Ms. France. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Do I have some?
I was just going to clarify to Ms. France that some of those are actually part of the $81 million.
Oh, great.
The $26 million and a portion of the 2018 dollars are, the 2019 dollars are not incorporated into that total cost because that is ongoing operations, so it's not part of the full cost of implementing the system, but 17 and 18 are.
That's part of that 80.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But Felix,
Sure, Mr. Weddington.
can you back up? But we are, the debt service is paid back the loan, right?
Yes.
Correct.
So the cost is in there. And we'll just be paying that much.
I think, do you know what the note on the SAP
I
program
think
is?
we're somewhere, I'm going to say, somewhere around 55 million in terms of debt outstanding. So we've been paying for this for a long time, and we've been paying down the debt, but I don't believe the debt service is that. Is that in your budget?
Yeah.
Okay, that's.
So that debt service we see is to pay down that 55 million.
Yes.
That number, I don't think
But
is
I'm
I
not
don't think
sure.
that's all of it.
Yeah.
That number looks too small.
Yeah.
What are the rest of it?
In the CFO's office probably, so we'd have to take a look at that. We can look at that and get that number for you.
Thank you, Mr. Weddington. Mr. Perez-Verdillo.
Yeah.
Just to follow up on that, so what you're saying is that those three numbers at the bottom aren't completely operating costs, and so what?
And then capital, just to clarify, the development efforts, this is capital.
Oh, I see operating
that
expenses.
line.
Yeah. Yes. Sorry, that wasn't clear. So it's like 21 million, and 1 and 2 would be considered part of the original 80 million. implementation costs. So
So if I wanted to understand the change in operating costs between 17, 18, and 19,
it would probably be better to just focus on 18 and 19 because 17, it didn't go live until the end of the year. So, but we did spend a lot of money.
And
It was more to, to make sure that everybody understood that we are definitely ramping down our costs and trying to get it under control. Does that help?
Yes, Ms. Gross and then Mr. Slivka.
Through the chair to Mr. Perez-Verdia, I think that we would like to extend the invitation to Ms. Kennedy, Ms. Alazala, and Mr. Perez-Verdia to come in and talk to us at length about the SAP process,
Yes.
what we have been through, where we are now, and where we think we're going to go, because this is such a big topic of conversation, or at least has been over the last 8 years. We want to make sure that you understand the history so that this is a little more clear to you, because it's sometimes like mud.
Go ahead, Mr. Slivka.
So I will say that that's part of that $5 million in the 2018 consulting. Part of that was actually capitalized as part of the capital expense. And so 2019 is really the first pure year, no capital, all operating.
Thank you.
Okay, so then I just kind of thought I would break down some of the cost savings we have implemented. The original, we have SAP that is hosted in the cloud. It's an SAP cloud service, and so when it originally was turned up, they implemented with many more servers than we needed, so we spent a lot of time decommissioning servers, and so definitely our hosting cost is less than originally planned, and this is kind of just a little overview. Last year we saved like approximately $360,000. This year it'll be $480. Next, in the 2020, it'll be $80, and the reason for it to be less in 2020 is because we end our hosting service with SAP. We do want to ultimately take it from being in the cloud and put it in our internal network. That will save money. We're still in. We have to. I think we need to negotiate through the end of 2020 what our costs will be with SAP. So, Felix, hold on, Laura.
Sure, Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Sorry, Susie, can you actually go back to the other slide? I don't want to belabor
That's
this,
okay.
but I now, maybe I'm just slower than Cameron and Suzanne, but, so 2018, if you took the capital amount out,
Yeah.
I'm going around community councils, many of us are saying, oh, our operating costs are lower because of this change we've made, but if you take that amount out, they're about the same in 2018 and 2019. Is that because we should be comparing 2018 to 2017? Or where? How does this work? I mean, how is the story true that we're saving money?
Right. Oh, let's go on.
Part of it has to do with the expenditures required to implement this, so some of it has to be capitalized, right? I think maybe using the term operating is erroneous in this transition, because we took all that 20 million up at the top says, capital expenses. Those are all people working on the system. We would have had to continue outside employees to work on the system if we hadn't transitioned to an internal structure and brought people in-house. So the goal is not to decrease our capital costs versus our operating costs. Our goal is to decrease our costs.
So maybe it's that. Do you mind, Felix? Maybe it's that. I think capital is a bad word, because capital to me means things, right? That's how our budget is. So those aren't things. They're people. They're staff. So maybe that's
To build a thing.
Yeah, but I mean that.
I agree.
It's people working on a thing, and we don't call that capital. So I think that's the confusion. So really, what you could see here is we saved probably about $1.5 million, assuming that that's actually operating costs. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn Davidson. Go ahead.
Okay, so we kind of covered that. Here's kind of as we stabilize the system, I kind of want to give a little update on our break fixes. We have payroll fixes for the system for the IAFF union. We've had some very specific targets and legal obligations that we have to focus on to support. 21 grievances changes that we focused on. Our target is we have to have these completed by the end of June. 14 have been completed or finishing being worked in this last session. 5 were duplicates. They said they wanted this, and they actually were the same thing. So we've scrubbed them, and then there's just 2 remaining. So I feel like we're going to most likely get that June 30 target, which is great. And then we are just continuing to do break fixes, and we do fixes in cycles. So they're 30-day cycles. And so in cycle 1, this is just for 19, 47, but we're up to 114 of regular cycle fixes, and then we've had this urgent, and an urgent cycle is just, something's broke, oh my gosh, fix it tomorrow. Things can't go on, so we had 14 urgent. So for 19, we've been able to do break fixes and correctly done them for 128 items. So the goal this year is to be stable and be able to manage all these changes as they hit us.
Sure. Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So why are you presenting this and not Bill? And is this different than what Bill's doing?
We can talk about all the payroll. There's payroll corrections that have, like, if someone wasn't paid correctly before, there's still actual activity that the payroll department is doing to make the correction and get the people's pay fixed. So there's a couple parts to it. There's the HR side, there's the payroll side of the house, and then there's the technology side. That's a very good way to say it. So we are focusing on supporting the technology to make sure there's no more breaks, really. But the payroll staff still has to say it worked, or hey, there's still one more. Hey, just because this fixed, it doesn't mean that these 50 paychecks have to still be corrected. I mean, there's still that effort. So.
Sure.
And you did IAFF just as an example. I assume that's not the only. Okay.
Ms. Babs.
Through the chair to Ms. Quinn Davidson, I think what Susie is trying to say is to show the progress that the IT team, as they are set up, is now able to make versus Mr. Falsey's presentations, which are focused on the back payroll errors and how we're getting through that process.
Mr. Falsey.
Yeah, I was going to add both of those. My presentations have largely been about the paper pay corrections that came in where the individual said, I was paid incorrectly. But increasingly, that story is we're down to only clearing the paper pay corrections once we can get the machine working correctly. So the clearing of the paper on the desk is now almost entirely dependent on Susie's team in consultation with ER and payroll updating the system. And that's really where the focus of the energy is.
Thank you. Mr. Perez-Verdia.
So am I to understand that this is this in comparison to something else in terms of there are fewer than there were previously?
Yes.
Or so that's what this is meant
This
to
is showing where, yes.
Okay. So there are fewer fixes being done now than there were previously done.
Fixing.
Thank you. I'm assuming that. I just didn't see
No,
that.
right. It's a really good point. It's a hard, I don't think there was a lot of effort initially. It was a lot of hurry up and get it done and not a lot of tracking. And we are now really focused on, okay, how many are there? What's the thing? How's the
So
thing?
previously
we're
you
getting
didn't
some
track them
data.
any.
They tracked it, but not as like, can't say how many fixes were done last September without having to go back and redo it. And now, as we're doing this moving forward, we can say we're working on this many, we have this number in. So our data is better now because we have more people on the team and we can track it and understand it. Hopefully, make sure we're on top of it.
Thank you. Thank you.
And then training update, we're still meeting with each department, making sure, identifying needs, figuring out the best way to help the department staff. And we had a very successful transit training and product delivered, and we're helping all the bus drivers, making sure that they can get in and log into SAP and do their leave and get their report, their pay stubs, all that stuff. So we feel like we're understanding a lot more about what's needed in the departments, and then we're still at the reports. We have custom reports we're continuing to develop. We still have our catalog of standard reports that we're reviewing and trying to get out to the business as fast as possible. That's it.
Any more questions? Mr. Weddleton?
Maybe it's you, maybe Bill, but I was talking to someone who's actually works for the police, and I said, "Were you getting your paychecks right?" He says, "I don't know." He says, "They're so complicated to read, I don't even know if I'm getting paid right." And that's all I know. I've never seen one, but is it possible that there's like codes in there and people can't understand what they are?
They originally had a pay stub that was hard to read, and there is a new one recently
How
that's
recent?
been implemented. I know it was completed, I think, in January. I'm not sure if payroll has pushed it out. I don't know that part, but that's a good question.
It was about a
I'll
month
find
ago.
out. Sure. Yeah, I'll find out if we've starting to use the new one, because I know it's in production and it is working. But I think part of it is that payroll would have to activate it, I think is a good way to say that. So I will find out.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. All right, we're going to go ahead and move on to Mr. Falsey.
All right, I'm going to give a different version of this presentation. It has no slides. So, for those who are new,
Dance.
for the last several versions of these updates, I have told a story, and the story has been, after turned on SAP, we went from having approximately 50 paper pay corrections submitted every month to, in the first month, getting 1,280 paper pay corrections. Then it went to 1,000, then it went to 800, then it stabilized at about 250, and now it's back down to about 100. The way at the time that we decided to tackle that was not to try to crank through, going through each piece of paper and correcting individual errors, because this office was just not staffed to be ever able to clear that backlog, but to use the machine to correct that backlog. Meaning, if the system is generating errors, we fix the machine, and the machine has the ability to go back in time and say, if I had been configured like this from the very beginning, here's how I would have paid people. That system generated overpayments, the system generated underpayments. We have still not collected any overpayments, but we have cleared all the underpayments that we corrected, and that gives us a final step of then saying, once the system has been correctly configured, then we go pick up all the papers and say, yes, this one is done, yes, this is done, yes, this one is done. So initially, we were, after the tsunami had crested over us, and we had all the paper pay corrections from the initial months dating all the way back to September 2017, and we had stabilized. We were clearing as many as we were getting in every month. We still had this very large backlog. We had progress where we had cleared about 30%, then we went to about 50%, and then we were sort of stuck at 70%, because now we're all the way down to the ones that really require these fixes that Susie has been focused on. So we've been at 70, 75% for the last few months. What I only recently came to learn was that the effort of generating those charts took nearly an entire day from one of the limited payroll employees. So I had made the executive decision to put a pause on updating the charts in favor of clearing some additional capacity for that person to continue to work on the actual important work of fixing the machine. I was also motivated to make that decision not just because we have set hard deadlines and we're going to try to clear all the IAFF defects by June 30th, so it's all hands on deck, but we have constantly been battered by new waves that have affected our ability to clear this problem. And the new wave was, we had a little earthquake on November 30th, and part of our FEMA reimbursement effort was pulling a whole bunch of pay records from that initial November 30th era, the early December era. So, unless there is a large hue and cry, I suspect we will pause on updating those charts, at least for a few more meetings, in favor of actually cranking through first the SAP reconfiguration. We're trying to put the FEMA stuff on the other side, and then we'll come back and give you the clearer window. But if there's concern about that, I'm happy to discuss.
I have a couple questions. Mr. Dunbar.
Yeah, I have two questions. First, what you just mentioned about how to comply with the FEMA process, it takes staff hours. Can we be reimbursed for those staff hours?
No.
Yeah.
That's not funny.
And so are we still then stuck at about 75%?
Well, I don't know, but I suspect the answer is probably yes. But as we are cranking through these important corrections that hopefully will all be done by June 30th, on the other side of that, I will definitely ask for a refresh on all those charts and we'll see where we are.
So
Stuck at 75% of what?
And that was always a moving target, I should clarify. So we had the whole backlog, and we kept saying, how many paper pay corrections are unfinished out of the total number of paper pay corrections of September 2011? And we got to a sort of steady state of 3/4 of them are finished and 1/4 is unfinished. There was also kind of a design choice that eventually we have to make. When do we stop adding paper pay corrections to the pile, if ever? So we keep adding and we keep clearing, which has been keeping us at about 75% until we push through big defect corrections, and then we jump because we wipe out a whole bunch in one shot, assuming we can then actually, after reconfiguring the system, pick up all the pieces of paper and say, yes, this is done.
Okay, one more question, can I? So I had heard through the grapevine, this is a rumor, that, and I think you've expressed something like this before, but we had made a basically policy decision that we weren't going to seek the overpayments, partially because the unions are also not seeking the damages that they could ask us, which are in the many millions of dollars. Is that true?
What I've said, and which remains the case, is that we have not asked to recoup overpayments until we are confident that we're done with the underpayments. So our thinking was we certainly did not want to be in the position of saying we overpaid you last week, can you give us that $50 back? And then the response would be, yes, but you underpaid me for the previous 4 weeks from that. Now, in practice, it may be that we'll be ending up waiving some or all of those overpayments, but that story is not yet concluded.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Ramos. Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just going to ask about what is the amount of the overpayments that we haven't collected, but given that they might really be related to some underpayments, I think I'll save that until later.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn Davidson. I put myself in the queue. So other than IAFF, are there any other unions that we have deadlines for that we still need to get corrections done?
I don't think there are any hard deadlines with any other unions. Looking to see if I have any phone for an expert, but I believe that's the case.
I believe APDEA may have roughly a June 30th one as well.
Okay.
But only 1 or 2, correct?
Yes, they only have 1 or 2 I think, payroll errors.
And that's actually a great example. One of the outstanding APDEA pay correction defects had to do with shift differential, which was generating a ton of corrections every single time. When that one goes through, that should help wipe out a huge chunk of paper.
Mr. Dunbar, on this topic?
Yes. Has IBW then been fully resolved, or have we chosen to not make them one of the priority unions with the deadline?
Everybody's a priority. I don't believe they are resolved yet.
There's no deadline for IBW.
I don't know. We'd have to ask ER to clarify that, but we can.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Peterson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I wanted to point out to the new members that even before we had SAP, there were payroll corrections pretty much every pay period. It just wasn't the level that we found that we needed to correct once we implemented SAP. So I think we were getting maybe 40 or 50 a month, and now we're getting maybe 100 or so. We still have a little progress to make, but we're headed in the right direction.
All right. Any other questions for Mr. Falsey? All right. Seeing none, thank you. So I'll go ahead and open it up to audience participation. We have just a few minutes. Oh, sure. Mr. France, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before Mr. Falsey leaves, we had a question initially about the local contribution and the 2 mil or 23% of BSA cap. If the BSA is changed, the statute, will that affect our community being able to provide the maximum local contribution?
Through Chair, I don't have that answer top of mind. We certainly ask Brian Stewart, who's been looking at it, in the legal department of the school district, and we'll certainly have a vested interest in that. Hopefully we have an answer too. Going a little bit out on the limb, but my recollection is that the received wisdom was if the government just short funded the existing BSA formula, and so it said you are owed 100, but I'm giving you 80, it didn't change our contribution ability, but that if they actually went ahead and tinkered with the formula, so since you are only owed 80, then that would have affected our ability to make contribution. But don't take that to the bank because I actually haven't looked at that.
Okay. Mr. Slivka.
So I did ask that question to the legal department, and they are working on our answer.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Haberman, you got your time.
My name is Eugene Carl-Haven. I represent myself, Colorado Public Press. When public process is appropriate, decision made by the governing body is more like a public interest. Today you had 3 committee meetings, some committee of the whole. One was out in another part of the area, 15 minutes from where they get to be traveled. With all due respect, it created a safety concern for both the public and the assembly to get to the next meeting. This was wrong. All 3 meetings had no agenda posted on the website. That's becoming a continued problem. You have to guess, okay, I'm going to go to this meeting like this one, and maybe it's something of interest. That's not the way it should work. And then the last thing, because I'm going to be short, is I attended the Anchorage Port Commission yesterday. And with all due respect, I went on the record there and noted to them that on their website, they had a agenda. The latest agenda they had posted there was for February 2018. I remind them that this is the year 2019. That is a kind of way of getting information out. And that's all I have to say, except one thing to point out that you may not be seeing me much tomorrow. I'll be monitoring APOC. They start early in the morning. So, but I'll be listening. Oh, just to say this, is please speak really, project your voice so I can listen to those tapes. And if you can request the clerk to get those tapes by the end of the day tomorrow, so it's not waiting till like a Monday, and a lot of those issues are going to be dealing with the Tuesday meeting, and that's all I have to say, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Haber. You bring up some good points. Before I get to Mr. Weddleton, if we did in fact make some errors on posting agendas, I apologize, and we'll get that corrected. Mr. Weddleton.
The thing at the port was an Anchorage Chamber of Commerce event, nothing to do with government.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton.
No, I was relating to a port commission meeting. Was at noon? Yes.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Work session's over.